I would like to welcome everybody today to an important roundtable. We have some people virtual, and we'll introduce them momentarily, but also here at the Capitol to talk about just an incredibly important issue, which is border security, law and order, where the future of this country is headed and where we've been for the last year. We're this week reaching 1 year of one-party rule in the country with the anniversary of President Biden's inauguration 1 year ago. And this means we've now endured a year of the federal government turning their backs on border states like Texas and like Arizona and many others that are marred by record high illegal border crossings and historic levels of drugs and human trafficking that have crossed our border. And the federal government has one job, and that is to provide for the defense of this nation. That's outlined very specifically and clearly in the Constitution, and sadly, this leadership under Democrat administration and under President Biden's lack of leadership has failed us in that. And like many of you, I've been to the border many times. I was there just over a week ago in Del Rio, and really surveying the border operations and the lack of security that we have. But what I was specifically doing was learning about Operation Lone Star. And in Texas, this is a program that the governor has been forced to do. It's an unfunded mandate that has been forced on states because the federal government has abdicated their responsibility. And our state, like all other border states, are being forced to do the same thing, to step up because of the lack of leadership and because of the refusal for any Democrat to visit the border this year. Sheriff's offices and local police departments and communities across my district and the nation are stretched thin. I know we'll hear from some sheriffs today, but their offices are picking up the slack for the federal government at the border. And this is the impact on recruitment, on retention. It cannot be understated. And from day one of this administration, we have been suffering under a complete disregard from the laws that we already have in existence. It's not we don't need new laws. We need to enforce the ones that we have. And that refusal to allocate the proper resources and to provide border security with the tools that they need really marks the Democrats' legacy for this time period. And the president's legacy, sadly, is leading to chaos, and every state is now a border state. I'm the lead Republican on the House Homeland Security Subcommittee for Intelligence and Counterterrorism. And I'm very frustrated with the Democrats' approach in this committee, who have refused to hold a single hearing this year in this Congress, have refused to hold a hearing in 2021 and now into 2022 on border security. With close to 2 million illegal border apprehensions under President Biden's watch, with the amount of fentanyl, much of which has been trafficked across the border, and it has become the leading killer of young adults in this country. Over 100,000 deaths are attributed to fentanyl this year. And we haven't held one hearing. That is shameful. Earlier in 2021, I was among the group of Republican members that went to El Paso with Leader McCarthy, who exposed the fact that we had record numbers of known or suspected terrorists who have crossed into this country. And yet this administration refuses to acknowledge that actual number. What we saw in Colleyville, Texas this weekend, should be a wake-up call to all of us. That border security is important and that it can impact every community in this country. Soon, I'll be introducing a bill that will require the administration to report to the American people exactly what that number of known or suspected terrorists are and how many have crossed into this country. Americans want one thing. They know we're going to have policy debates on these issues. They want transparency and they want accountability. Yep. They want one thing. So at this point in time, I'd like to now turn to my good friend and colleague from Louisiana, former prosecutor who has led on many of these issues, Congressman Mike Johnson.
Thank you, August. I appreciate it. And Pete Stowers walking in, and I'll yield to him in just a minute when he gets settled. Grateful to all of you guys for your time on this. We talk about it internally constantly. Our great frustration being in the minority party in Congress. As we know, we have a unified government right now. The Democrats control the White House and, of course, both houses of Congress. And so in so many ways, our hands are tied. And the people sitting around this table today and those who work on these issues, we are so frustrated because we see what's happened with all of these issues. Whether it's the border crisis, it's the rising, skyrocketing crime in all these cities, there is a unifying reason for this, right? It does come down to law and order. That's what we've entitled this discussion group, because that is the central responsibility of the government, as you noted, August. I mean, the federal government is supposed to ensure the security and the safety and the sovereignty of our nation. And when you allow the border to be overrun and you allow crime to spike in these cities, as we're seeing now, it's just a complete failure of our, as we note, our primary responsibility. And so the purpose of this is for us to have a dialogue about it, to raise these issues with the American people, and to come to solutions. When we get our governing moment again, which we believe will be next year, we will be ready to fix all that ails us. So it is, as you noted, August, I mean, what's happening is completely foreseeable. What makes it so outrageous is that the results we're seeing right now are these are the direct results of bad policy choice. On the border, President Biden inherited a secure border. President Trump's policies worked. And he went in and instinctively did exactly the opposite of what the Trump administration did. Almost, it seems to us they did it just because they were Trump policies, whether it makes sense for the country or not. And so by executive orders in the first several days of his administration, he signed a piece of paper and effectively instituted the opposite policies that Trump had done at the border. And this is the reason we're in the situation we're in. Stop construction of the border security, the wall, of course. Stop deportations of illegal immigrants. That was all in his first 100 days. Ended the Remain in Mexico policy, the public health restrictions at the border. I made a greatest hits list here. He brought back catch and release from the Obama administration. It included mass amnesty for millions of illegals in the Build Back Better bill. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, what they've done. Fentanyl, as you noted, is a crisis. It is now the leading cause of death among Americans 18 to 45. Again, completely foreseeable and avoidable, and yet they won't do anything to do it. Quickly on the rising crime rate, you look at all these weakened bail policies, you look at the no prosecutions for brazen criminal thieves, you downgrade crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. All of this sends a message to the bad guys that it's a field day for them, and so that's why we're seeing this. We had, I think, 12 or 13 cities in America set their all-time murder rate record in 2021. These are policy choices. They need to be reversed, and I'm so glad all of you guys are dedicated to that. We'll be joining forces, and we'll be presenting a plan in the coming months to the American people on how to solve these crises. But the work begins now, as you know. So I yield back to you.
Well, Congressman Johnson, your words are well spoken, and when you go down those hits list, that affects the American people. It affects our communities, and we can't forget that. So I apologize, everybody, and just get into a good discussion. And I just appreciate you all being here. I want to thank Leader McCarthy for hosting these important discussions to highlight the many failures of this administration for the American people. In 50 years in Washington, like Joe Biden has, you somehow get this idea that you know more and you know better than the American people on Main Street. I want to thank you to everyone today to talk about radical policies and rhetoric have led to a drastic rise in crime and an open border. As a former law enforcement officer of 23 years, I know that a properly staffed and properly trained police force is necessary to keep our community safe. Defunding the police, or even just talking about this idea, is wrong and dangerous. Democrat-run cities across the country who have defunded the police have seen an increase in the rise in crime. And to illustrate this point, I want to talk about my home state of Minnesota, specifically the city of Minneapolis. Knowing this, it should come to no surprise to anyone that in 2021, Minneapolis recorded the highest number of homicides in over 20 years, or that over 600 people were treated for gunshot wounds in the city of Minneapolis in 2021. This isn't just happening in Minnesota, it's happening across the country in these Democrat-run cities. 157 officers were killed in the line of duty in 2021. That's minus COVID. That statistic is unacceptable. And it's time for Democrats to stop disrespecting and vilifying our brave police officers. We want them to come on our side and denounce the defund police movement and actually work on common sense solutions that will stop the crime crisis and hold offenders accountable. We, as Republicans, we must continue, and we will, to express our support for the men and women who keep our communities safe. And I ask my Democratic colleagues to join us in support for the American law enforcement officer. Minnesotans and all Americans deserve to live in safe communities, and I will continue to work to ensure this is our shared reality. At this point in time, I would ask us all to introduce ourselves, and I'm going to start with my good friend, Representative Higgins from Louisiana.
Thank you, brother. Clay Higgins, I represent the 3rd District of Louisiana. Happy to be here when advised. I'll have some
Debbie.
Hi, I'm Debbie Lesko from Arizona. A great border state, but having a lot of border issues. And so, is this a good time now? Are we supposed to talk, or are we going to
Introduce, then we'll let you talk.
All right,
Yeah.
sounds good. Thanks, Pete.
Chip.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. August, great here with the good friends. Chip Roy, Texas 21, western end of the district I represent. Gets about 100 miles from the border. Spent a lot of time at the border. Good to see Brandon Judd, good friends with Border Patrol Union, and obviously a lot we need to do here.
And August and I have already introduced ourselves. Raphael.
Sure. Hi, I'm Raphael Mingwal. I'm a senior fellow and head of research for the Policing and Public Safety Initiative at the Manhattan Institute, a think tank based in New York City.
We're so glad to have you here. And Mike Johnson, Vice Chairman of the House Republicans, Louisiana's 4th District, and we're all border states now, aren't we? So, yeah.
And our 2 sheriffs. Brandon, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. I'm the National Border Patrol Council President. I've been a Border Patrol agent for 24 years. Appreciate you having me and appreciate this discussion.
Hi, I'm Mike Milstead, Sheriff in Minnehaha County in the great state of South Dakota, where we do defend and not defund police. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I chair the National Sheriff's Association Drug Enforcement Committee.
And I'm Sheriff Vernon Stanforth. I'm the National Sheriff's Association President this year. And we welcome the opportunity to address this roundtable.
What I'm going to do is quickly, I want to go to around the table because I know you have comments. Reference the law enforcement and the border. So Representative Higgins, go ahead.
I thank my brothers at the Thin Blue Line for joining us today, this meeting. I'm going to focus on the border in my limited amount of time and the generational impact that the Democrat majority has brought upon America as it relates to the disintegration of our sovereign border to the south and crime, increasing crime across America. The 1.7 million documented law enforcement interceptions at the border actually equates to over 2 million crossings, because we got about, my understanding is about 35% getaway now, which is higher than it's been in a couple of decades, which is because law enforcement is, number one, overwhelmed, and number 2, restricted by executive policies to actually do their job. So what that means is over 500,000 active illegal criminals have moved into our country without the processing of the federal government. And what's important for Americans to recognize and for all of us to acknowledge is that the 2 categories of human beings that are crossing into our country illegally is pretty easy to understand. You have those that want to turn themselves in, and they want to be processed, and that's your 1.7 million. Then you have the ones that want to escape. These guys, they're running drugs, they're trafficking human beings, they're involved, they're actively involved in criminal endeavor. So it's not just that a percentage of the people crossing illegally have made it through and not been intercepted and processed. It's that the ones that are making it through and not being intercepted are the ones that intend to evade police. Those are the criminals. So you have over 500,000 in 1 year, 500,000 active illegal criminals have come into the United States, and they're now competing with the existing criminal networks that existed across the country. So you have basically enhanced market competition amongst criminal networks that is causing more aggressive criminal action. We combine that with policies that have been embraced amazingly by municipalities and states across the country in Democrat-controlled areas that weaken prosecution, restrict law enforcement interaction, and is essentially suppress common sense law enforcement policy. You combine that with an additional, 500,000 active criminals dumped into the corners of America, you're obviously going to have an increase in violent crime, and it's going to injure our nation. So we can directly address this congressionally by, number one, forcing policy that reestablishes a controlled and secure sovereign border. We had this thing under control. So we've done it before. We know it can be done. And number two, we have to have policies from the executive branch and through Congress that reflect strong support across the country, and prosecution, fair and equitable prosecution, yes, but aggressive prosecution for those criminals that are arrested and put into the judicial system. So that I appreciate the time to participate. I look forward to questions, but those are my opening remarks. Good sir.
Representative Higgins, very well said, and from the law enforcement standpoint, your background, as you know, and as you noted, when you're soft on a crime and you have an open border, this is what we can expect across America and American cities. So, Representative Lesko from the great state of Arizona.
Thank you very much, Pete. And before I say anything, I want to thank the sheriffs and Brandon Judd for your service to our communities and to our nation, and to all of your officers and Border Patrol officers that are trying to keep our communities safe. I applaud you. Yes, I live in Arizona. Prior to serving in the United States Congress, I served in the Arizona State Legislature, and we've been battling border security along the southern border for many years. And I was very thankful under President Trump that he actually was trying to secure the border. We've heard from, especially Yuma, Arizona was a good example how walls and fences work. And so he was continuing to build the fence. Also did the Remain in Mexico policy, and that just by itself decreased the number of people that were flooding across the border. And now just recently, I think it was last week, I spoke with, in our border caucus here in Congress, we spoke with the Yuma mayor, Yuma, Arizona mayor, and the Yuma County supervisor, and they were telling us just how terrible it is and how wide open the borders are now, and it's all because of this current administration's policies, quite frankly. I mean, on day one, President Biden said we're not going to continue building the wall. On day one, he said we're going to get rid of the Remain in Mexico policy. And the Yuma people said they interviewed illegal migrants that were crossing the border, and a number of them said, well, we heard that President Biden wanted us here. Wow. And so this is, the policies of the Biden administration and my Democratic colleagues are incentivizing people to come here. And it just, it brings along drugs, human trafficking. We've heard testimony how women, children are being used in sex slaves, sex trafficking. Fentanyl's flooding across our border. It is now the #1 cause of death over COVID in a certain age group. And this is some really serious problems, and I find it amazing that President Biden just recently proclaimed January as National Human Trafficking Month and urged all others to combat human trafficking, yet he doesn't see that his own policies are causing human trafficking. And that's why I led a letter, trying to wake him up saying, listen, you want to combat human trafficking, close the border. And so with that, I yield back.
Well, Debbie, well said. I was down in not only in Arizona, but El Paso. And I spoke with the agents as well. They talked about the same things that you just did. Those good policies that were in place that secured our border, that reduced the felonious assaults on the Customs and Border Patrol agents. Well said. Chip Roy from the great state of Texas.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for you guys for joining us. We want to turn this over to you guys on the front lines here shortly, so I'll make it quick. The fact of the matter is that in the United States of America right now today, the American people are much less safe than they were a year ago. They're in fact in danger as a direct result of policies of this administration, the failures of this Congress to address them. Those are the facts. We had National Guard having to actually fire yesterday and use their weapons and fire on someone that was, I think, alleged to be paid by a cartel in Texas. We had a significant number of assaults on Texans. We've had ranchers getting overrun, fences getting cut, livestock getting out. We've got COVID problems in South Texas. We've got Border Patrol who are facing danger. We have immigrants that are being currently, as we speak, sitting here in the confines of the United States Capitol. We have immigrants being taken up I-35 to be put into the sex and human trafficking trade. Those are the facts. That's what the data will tell you. We had in Bernie, Texas, which I represent, 9 people stopped in a car. It was being driven by a cartel employee, American citizen, with 2 people stuffed in a trunk. And you had 7 people being taken to a stash house in Houston, Texas. That's happening right now. There's a stash house in Houston, Texas. There's a stash house in San Antonio. There's a stash house in Del Rio. A stash house in Laredo. That's happening today. And this administration not only is not doing anything about it, this administration is actively pursuing the policies to make it happen. It's purposeful. They are making choices to endanger migrants for crass political purposes and endangering Americans in the process. Human beings are dying. Human beings are getting raped. People are being put in danger. Fentanyl is flooding into our schools. Right now today in America, there'll be a child, or an adult, I should say, in college, an 18, 19, 20-year-old, who will take Xanax, and it will be laced with fentanyl because it was cooked in the backyard by a cartel in Mexico, being pumped through by China into Mexico and the Western Hemisphere to endanger Americans. That's happening today. And the administration has the policies and the tools that they could enact to do something about it, and they refuse to. We'll hear people saying how many more resources we need to spend at the border. Yes, we need to finish the wall. Yes, we ought to clear a cane. Yes, we ought to provide the tools necessary, of course. But it's not a lack of resources, it's a lack of will. That's right. It's a lack of will to enforce the policies that exist, and we ought to enforce them. Right now today in the United States Capitol, a mere feet from where we are right now, people are not allowed to dine without showing a vaccine passport card. Yet we have people pouring across our border when we have Title 42 pandemic rules that would allow us to stop them. Yet we're not doing it. We have a court order by a federal judge in Texas for microprotection protocols to be used in Mexico, but yet Mayorkas and the Biden administration refuse. They lie saying that they're going to do microprotection protocols, while also having a memo saying they want to unwind them, and everybody gets the joke. They are actively abandoning their duty and failing to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. That's what's happening. The American people need to know it. I'm grateful for the law enforcement people on the lines. Pete and others have already talked about what's happening in our cities, the danger to Americans, the 24-year-old who was stabbed yesterday, the 19-year-old girl who was just killed in New York, the 50% rise in homicides in Austin, the 50% rise in homicides in San Antonio, the danger on our streets because we're not back in the blue. We're running away from it. We're defunding the police like the $150 million the Austin City Council took out of the budget of the police department in Austin.
And now we've got our men and women in blue who are in danger, and the American citizens are facing the consequences. 911 calls not getting answered. Let's fix it now. We can do it, and we just got to have the willpower to do it. Thanks, Heather.
Those are great comments, and I'll hand it back to Pete to hand it over to Raphael. But every state is a border state, and what he mentioned about stash houses is so true. There are stash houses in every single city throughout this country that are being used in the most inhumane conditions that we could ever imagine.
No, Chip, the comments are well stated. And I want to tell you that this comes from a BCA agent out of the state of Minnesota, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension out of the state of Minnesota. So with the redirection of funds in the city of Minneapolis, a code 3 call, and the sheriffs will know what this is, that's lights and sirens. It takes an average for the highest priority 15 minutes within the city of Minneapolis. That's unbelievable. And the BCA agent said, I can't believe it. When I worked as a police officer in the city of Duluth, Minnesota, which is the 3rd largest city in the state of Minnesota, our priority calls were about 45, maybe 50 seconds, a minute and a half. We were there because we had properly staffed individuals. And the sheriffs know with the high, the probability of the high crime, you're going to staff with more police officers. So we were there right away, which was disincentivized the criminal behavior. We had the best chance of apprehending and the best chance of prosecuting because the evidence was right there. We caught them, basically red-handed. And so for the one of our major cities, and this isn't just Minneapolis, it's all over these major cities that are run by our Democrat mayors that want to disincentivize, defund, and reallocate resources to other parts of their city. And so just Minneapolis alone, 15 minutes for a code 3 call. You can do a lot of damage to innocent victims and families with that. So I'll turn it over to Raphael.
Well, first let me say thank you so much for having me to speak today. I'm pleased to be here because this is a really important set of issues. I think our country's at a real crossroads when it comes to issues of policing and criminal justice, which is my area of expertise. But I think those issues are quite intertwined with issues of border security insofar as they both implicate the concept of law enforcement. Now, while the debates about those issues, I think, seem to have reached a fever pitch since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, I think one could also argue that the real inflection point was actually reached after the fatal shooting of Michael Brown in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, which, along with other viral incidents, touched off a series of violent protests and inspired the adoption of a number of really significant and quite radical reforms. In the years that followed, violent crime began trending upwards. Homicides in the United States rose in 2015, 16, 19, and 2020. And despite the fact that 2020 spike represents the largest homicide increase in modern history, the data will likely show that 2021 also saw a national homicide increase. Those increases, coincided with significant shifts in both policing practices and criminal justice policy. Over the last decade, the United States has seen sharp declines in arrests, in the number of police on the beat, and in the national jail and prison populations, which became more drastic after 2020. Those changes, along with the election of progressive prosecutors across the country, broad decriminalization efforts, sanctuary city policies, bail reforms, and other depolicing and decarceration initiatives, didn't just come about out of thin air. They are the byproducts of a well-funded, highly organized reform movement that has capitalized on the successful dissemination of a dangerously false narrative, which is that policing and criminal justice are fundamentally corrupt and racist enterprises. Contrary to conventional wisdom, however, the U.S. is not suffering through a mass or over-incarceration crisis. Prison remains a relatively rare sanction largely reserved for weak offenders who are extremely likely to reoffend once released. And despite what's been said about police violence, the fact remains that somewhere in the range of 99% of all arrests in this country are effected without the use of physical force, let alone deadly force. Sadly, context, nuance, and truth are severely lacking in our ongoing national conversation about these issues. And until that changes, I fear that we're going to continue to see the progress that we made in the war on crime eroded, particularly in and around American cities. If that problem is allowed to fester, it will pose a real and significant threat to the economic vitality of our urban centers, which will not be good for anyone.
Well, thank you very much. And I think at this point we're going to have some questions and just have an open dialogue. And I think I'll start with it. This is for our law enforcement experts. Any three you can answer or chime in. How much has the anti-police rhetoric and the defund policies contributed to the rise in crime?
Hi, this is Sheriff Stanforth. I truly believe it's literally across the country we're seeing the impact of defunding the police, and other major cities that have where their councils have cut their budgets, realigned the funds. You're seeing the spike in carjackings. You're seeing home invasions. Every day you see this in the newspaper. It's now affecting the smaller communities across America. We're seeing the onset of some crimes that we've never experienced in the last 20 years. They've been so minuscule that they weren't even on the charts. And we're seeing that now. It's just, the fact that they released so many inmates from these liberal communities, have released them back into the communities. We're seeing that impact now because now they're well educated. They were in the prisons. We call them the cartel universities across America, and these people now know how to operate drug franchises, and they know you're seeing this major impact. Sheriff Milstead, I don't know, you might have some insight in that as well.
Thanks, Vern. Yeah, we're feeling a little of the backside of the defund the police, and that a good share of the applicants that we're getting in South Dakota right now are officers fleeing from these liberal cities and states, wanting to come to a state where they feel that the state supports and the public supports law enforcement. So it's kind of worked in reverse to us. Certainly I can say that since those efforts in our own community, I can't tell you how many times people come up to our deputies and thank them for their service. They'll come up to our police officers and buy them their lunch just because they appreciate so much and they realize the pressure they're under. One of the things we're really seeing is a significant decrease in the applicants. This job, public service, has always been one that was attractive if you really wanted to serve. But the defund the police, the rhetoric that was out there, a lot of the applicants normally have a girlfriend, husband, wife, and they just say, hey, I don't want you to get into that business. I don't want the target to be on your back. And so our applicant pool is down. Our turnover rate is up, and so all those things impact even agencies where the defund movement really hasn't hit us as hard as other jurisdictions. But imagine what it's like to try to hire good qualified officers today in Minneapolis or Seattle or San Francisco. And so they've done it to themselves. It's unfortunate. You've talked about the drugs. It's interesting. In South Dakota, if I went to any service group or Rotary Club or Optimist Club, well, they don't invite me anymore, but if I go to those clubs and they say, how do we impact this drug? How do we win this battle with the drug addiction and the fentanyl rolling into the South Dakota? I mean, I'm over 1,000 miles from the southwest border. My number one answer is secure our border. For crying out loud, 90% of our illegal drugs are coming across our southern border. I just talked to Sheriff Daniels this morning from Cochise County, Arizona, one of the border sheriffs who has been very outspoken about the quite frankly, as he called it this morning, it's a shit show right now on the southwest border. I mean, they have great partners in CBP, and I was impressed about a year ago at Western Sheriff's Association meeting where all the southwest border sheriffs sat with their CBP sector chiefs and talked about the troubles on the southwest border. And I was so impressed about that cooperation, the level of cooperation between those officers and the sheriff's offices. but you could hear that frustration about the policies that can't be followed, that the policies that aren't being enforced, the lack of consequences, the lack of a shared plan with the White House, quite frankly, to secure the borders. And it's making, well, almost all of our crime in our community, all of our murders have a nexus to drugs. Quite often here it's methamphetamine, or it's an opioid that's typically a fentanyl, synthetic fentanyl. Our overdoses are way up. All these things are violent crime, especially around methamphetamine. That's the direct link. And so it has a single place that it's coming through, and that's our southern border. We need to provide security on our southern border, and for sheriffs and across America to focus on that is important, I think, and anything for Congress that we can do to support that security at our southern borders. It's critical for the safety of our communities.
I want to comment on that. And I tell people in northern Minnesota that I represent, if you don't think that fentanyl and those drugs coming through our southern border isn't coming to Main Street, Minnesota, and getting our young kids hooked and overdosing on these, you're crazy. And those of you in law enforcement, those of us who have given death notifications to unsuspecting parents, when they've experimented once, it's the most uncomfortable thing that you can do, and you can never prepare for that, and you never forget the reaction of the parents. And that's something that we can't afford. Our young people are precious, and we have to stop this. So, Raphael, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some data to supplement what was just said about depolicing and decarceration, because I think those are two really important issues. And, on the depolicing front, in 2013, we had 713,000 police officers working in full-time uniform roles in this country. That number is now below 680,000. And the Police Executive Research Forum, which is a group that represents police departments across the country, just recently reported that only 93% of the vacancies in their departments are being filled right now. So this really isn't a job that people are lining up for the way that they used to just 10 years ago. On the decarceration front, I would note that over the last 10 years, between 2009 and 2019, the prison population in the United States declined by 17%. It declined by another 15% just between 2019 and 2020. Almost 10 years worth of decarceration in a single year. Jail inmates between 2019 and 2020 declined by 25%. And over the 2009 to 2019 period, as the number of police went down, so too did the number of arrests. They went down 25% during that period. So these all have real consequences that I think we're all starting to feel across American cities.
Absolutely, Raphael. August.
Yeah, whether you're sitting here as a member of Congress and taking the oath sworn in to this Congress, or whether you're law enforcement, I'd like to thank the sheriffs, and Brandon, thank you for what you do. In the oaths that you take to keep our country safe and to keep our community safe. Brandon, what I'd like to focus on, I really appreciate your message and what you do to represent Border Patrol agents everywhere. What I've noticed is, a real drop in morale, and I'm interested to hear from you whether or not you see the same thing, and how can we get that morale back on track if it is an issue, and do Border Patrol agents that you speak with day in and day out, that you work with, do they think that they have the tools and they are able to actually enforce the laws that we already have on the books?
So I wish I was here speaking to you as a Border Patrol agent, but CBP has not authorized me to speak in that capacity. So I'm here as the president of the National Border Patrol Council, representing the men and women of the Border Patrol who do a great job every single day. I believe that as Sheriff Milstead and Sheriff Stanforth would back me up on this statement. But law enforcement officers, we put on that uniform because we have a desire to go out and protect the American public. We have a desire to serve our fellow citizens. That's the reason. That's what motivates us to go out each and every day and face the dangers that we face. If it wasn't for that desire to serve our fellow citizens, it would be impossible right now to patrol the border. You can line 5,000 Border Patrol agents up across the entire border, and we could apprehend every single person that is entering the country illegally but if we continue to release them, they're going to continue to come. It used to be that we could have a high presence, and again, law enforcement, local law enforcement, county sheriffs, it's the same. It used to be that we could have a presence, a high visibility presence in an area, and that alone would deter crime. But because of the current defund the police movement, because of the current not properly enforcing our immigration laws, nobody is scared of the law anymore. If they're not going to be prosecuted, if they're not going to be held accountable, they're going to continue to violate the law. Crime always takes the path of least resistance. They're going to do what they're able to do. Crime is also based upon risk reward. And if the reward is much greater than the risk, and right now there is very little risk in crime because so few people are being prosecuted, we're going to continue to see an uptick in crime if we don't do what is necessary to suppress the crime rates that we're currently seeing, and continue to support our law enforcement men and women. To answer your question directly, the morale is the lowest that I've ever seen it in my 24-year career. The only way we can increase that morale is if we believe that our job means something, if we believe that we're truly protecting the American public. When that happens, morale goes up, the work level goes up in comparison with the morale, and the American citizens are more safe.
I just want to say, I want you to know that you and your officers and the work they do matter for this nation and the security of this nation. And I am very saddened to hear that the morale is the lowest in your tenure of 24 years. That's unacceptable. Chip.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Brandon, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on that. And this is the closest to a hearing we get right now, and the ability to have people before the committee that ought to be appearing before the committee. Secretary Mayorkas, for example, has not appeared before the House Judiciary Committee to answer questions on these things. Let me ask you a series of questions, if you don't mind, sort of yes or no-ish answers, and kind of keep it tight so I can go through a series. Is it yes or no, there are laws on the books, the Secure Fence Act and otherwise, requiring that we get border construction and get barriers and fencing constructed?
So is that happening? No, it's not happening. That is true, but it's not happening.
Right, and it is true that in fact there are contracts that are in place that are not being followed through. In fact, they've been cut off by the administration, and there are fence parts that are rusting in the fields in Texas and otherwise, correct?
That is true.
And it is true that right now we still have a significant pandemic around the world, and that we have rules in place like vax mandates in the nation's capital and in Texas and in Arizona and all along the border and all across the country. And it is true, however, that we still have a wide open border without the use of Title 42, which was being used prior to this current administration. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it is correct that Title 42 enforcement was a significant deterrent to hold the line and keep people from coming across the border, and that this administration has actively chosen not to apply it, correct?
That is correct.
It is correct that there is a federal court order right now that the administration is supposed to be implementing the migrant protection protocols. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it is in fact true, though, that those migrant protection protocols are not being fully implemented, or they are being lightly implemented without any significant engagement with Mexico to actually enforce them. Is that correct?
Only a handful in El Paso, a handful in San Diego every day, so yes, that is correct.
And as a result of those things, is it safe to say that the current administration is not following all of the laws and the procedures and the policies on the books that Congress has put in place to carry out the laws of the United States in order to secure the border of the United States and keep its people safe?
I would unequivocally say that is correct.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Great questions. Mike?
Yeah, let me jump in because we are greatly frustrated in the House Judiciary Committee. We have jurisdiction over this, but as Chip mentioned, we've not had any hearings on this. Mayorkas will not come and appear before us. The majority party does not allow it, but let me tell you what they are for. They're officially on record, not only of not enforcing all the laws that were just discussed, but they want to completely incentivize the breaking of our immigration laws because they want to grant amnesty to everybody who comes here. And this is not a talking point. This is not hyperbole. Real quick illustration, in the late fall, we had a hearing for about 14 hours. Chip and I had to sit through that misery, and the purpose of which was to use the House Judiciary Committee to amend their budget reconciliation bill, add amnesty to it. What does that have to do with the budget reconciliation? Nothing at all, but who cares? So for 14 hours, we debated this. The Republicans were unified against it. The Democrats, of course, want amnesty, which would account, we think, for probably 8 to 10 million illegals to just allow them in the country permanently. But to illustrate, to tie all this together and illustrate how absurd this is, at the end of that hearing, we began to bring amendments, Republican amendments, to try to limit at least the number in some way. We knew that we would lose the vote in the committee, that it would be attached to the bill, but we wanted to restrict it. So we brought an amendment, for example, to limit. We said to our Democrat colleagues, okay, if you're going to grant amnesty, there should be at least some subcategories of persons that you would not want included. Well, for example, we brought an amendment, MS-13 gang members, a known violent gang member. Surely you don't want them to come in illegally and be granted amnesty, right? Every Democrat on the committee, guys, voted against that amendment. Then we brought another one. We said, well, how about convicted sex offenders? If we know someone is a dangerous sex offender in their home country, shouldn't they be excluded from your Democrat amnesty plan? Every Democrat voted against it. Guys, we brought amendments. The most absurd, maybe, was in a series of amendments, we said, what about persons convicted of DUI, driving under the influence? Terribly dangerous. It kills thousands of Americans every year, maims hundreds of thousands. Every Democrat on this committee, I said, is on record opposing DUI, saying it's a great scourge on society. If we have an illegal come across and they've been convicted of at least one DUI, surely you would want them excluded from amnesty. Nope, every Democrat voted it down. We went to 2 DUIs. We ended with 10 or more DUI convictions, guys. 10 or more DUI convictions. And the Democrats, every single one on the House Judiciary Committee, voted against prohibiting them from being given amnesty. This is dangerous stuff. This is their avowed policy openly, and we have to oppose it at every turn.
Mike, I'll tell you that 1 DWI excludes you from entering the country of Canada.
Right.
So, well said. I do have to, before we go to the reporters' questions, just give me 30 seconds, and this is for the sheriffs. You know, would both you elected officials say that the increase in drug trafficking and use and abuse, are you seeing an increase in your communities?
This is Sheriff. Yes. Certainly increase directly related to drugs coming in. One of the things that we not only see an increase in crime, but we see an increase in tragedies, and that's overdose deaths. Just in our 2-county area here in Sioux Falls, Minnehaha, and Lincoln County, had 38 overdose deaths last year. That's almost twice what it was the year prior. And let me just give you a really quick story of one. One is 3 young workers from a local company. I know the owner of the company, and they had a little party one night, and at the end of having a few beers, they decided somebody went out and got one pill. Well, it was one of these counterfeit fentanyl pills, and they crushed it up and they snorted it. And later that afternoon, 2 of them were found dead and the third one near death. And so that's the kind of tragedies that we're seeing with the fentanyl, and almost half of our overdose deaths in our 2-county area are methamphetamine also. And we know meth is coming across that border in liquid form, powder form, in backpacks. And so both the meth and fentanyl directly relate to our violent crime and directly relate to the heartbreak that these family members feel when we knock on their door and tell them that they've lost a loved one.
Would you say that you're seeing an increase in use, abuse, and deaths in your county?
Oh, yeah. Fayette County is located just south of Columbus, just north of Cincinnati. We're a very small county, and we see, I mean, every day we're dealing with overdoses. The number of deaths, tragic as it is, our task force are working on a regular basis in the central Ohio area. And in 2021, they confiscated more than $70 million worth of drugs were seized. That's compared to 2019, when they confiscated or seized $45 million worth of street value of drugs. Just as an example of the fact that our volume is going up, the numbers are going up, the technology and how they're getting it to our communities is going up as well. I thought it was very interesting. We sometimes think that, especially in Ohio, we're isolated from the border, but we have a direct line to the border. And I found it interesting that our task force has identified bus lines that are bringing illegals out of the border straight to Ohio. And they have identified truck stops where they bring these illegals up, and they're coming up on commercial bus lines rather than in the back of a Suburban, or they're coming up in vans. So they're trying to be under the radar, and they're getting into our communities. And the technology that you're using, the sheriff mentioned a while ago, we were traditionally, you think about the backpack that they're carrying their drugs on. Now that's UPS, it's FedEx. They're sending these to our communities, and Columbus, Ohio has become a hub for the drug distribution in central and in the Midwest. We're getting so much drugs coming in here. Just this week, our task force was able to apprehend one of the couriers that has been operating out of Columbus, and he replaced a man that was arrested a year ago. So he's been able to operate. He bought the franchise, so to speak, and was operating in the Columbus market. And until our drug task force was able to integrate and get into his operation, and yesterday they were able to take him down. They were able to find out that he has sent $1 million back to the cartel from his operation out of Columbus, this one deal that they're operating in. The kilos of fentanyl, enough to kill most of the community that was coming in, they were able to stop. But we know that if we got him, that's just a small portion of what's going on that we're missing. But it's just off the charts, and our guys are working day and night. And that now, one thing I think the members of the Congress, if it's not on your radar, it needs to be on your radar. Is we were advised that the president is preparing to issue an executive order that basically overrides the will of the Congress with the voting down of the George Floyd Act. He's preparing this now. Law enforcement, at least from my involvement as a national president, have not been at the table with the White House and looking at any of these issues. They're just going to issue this executive order, we think, any time now, and it's going to have a tremendous impact, negative impact on our recruitment, on our retention, on maintaining our drug task force if they're affiliated with federal entities. This is an alarming issue that we're facing, and I think the National Sheriff's Association as well is looking at how we can challenge this executive order, because I think it's illegal. I believe that we've already established that when President Trump issued his executive order on the sanctuary cities, and I believe it was the 9th District Court overruled that. And I think this is the same principle that President Biden is trying to issue an executive order that is illegal. And I think the courts have already ruled on that. And I think that's the Congress needs to be in tune with this and try to fight this as best we can.
Much for your comments, Sheriff. And now we're going to open up the floor to any of the reporters who have questions.
Actually, I want to follow up with what was just mentioned in regards to this executive order that the president is looking to issue as far as this police reform initiative. That could possibly include qualified immunity. How do Republicans intend to challenge that? If not issued by the president, then Mr. Clyburn has suggested attaching it to a must-pass bill. then how do Republicans intend to challenge that?
Sheriffs, I don't know if you heard the question, but it was in a potential executive order removing qualified immunity. And what's your thought on that?
Getting off mute, let me just address the congressional part, and then you can go in and talk about the qualified immunity. Obviously, we know law enforcement are not going to support, generally speaking, the removal of qualified immunity. Look, we can all have a debate about whether the Supreme Court's creation of qualified immunity in 1970 or whatever the year was is the right way to go about policymaking, but what you cannot debate is the extent to which our law enforcement need to know that they can go act in the line of duty without being put up for lawsuits and being challenged and being gone after by the American people without regard to the circumstances that they face on the front lines. And so we've got to address that. And frankly, with respect to what they're doing, when President Trump was in office, I was proud to introduce the Article 1 Act, a bill. Senator Lee introduced a version on the Senate side to say that we need to pull back powers from the president with respect to executive orders under emergencies. We cannot allow the President of the United States to be running this place tyrannically through fiat as a dictator. This is Article 1. This is Congress, and we have to reassert ourselves and take control of those things back. That takes every tool in the toolbook. That includes funding. We shouldn't be funding any of this while it's being challenged in the courts, which it no doubt will be and should be challenged in the courts. But we've got to use every tool in our toolbox as well, which includes not funding the very things that they're doing, which are unconstitutional, unlawful, and an extension of what the president can do.
I think that, just to add to that, having been a police officer for 23 years, qualified immunity, you have to qualify for it. If you're following your policies and your procedures and your training, you need to be protected. If something needs to change internally, then those respective departments will do that. But if you're following your policies and your procedures and your training, it's important that these law enforcement officers understand that when they're following that the municipalities or the counties will have their back. With that being said, you can look at the state of Colorado that changed some of their qualified immunity and look at the diminished number of candidates that applied for law enforcement jobs. That's just another way to take away resources. Listen, we want the best and the brightest men and women to be serving our communities for years. And right now, and I think the sheriffs and other law enforcement agencies would tell you that they're looking at the profession because of the vilification of it. We want and we need, and these officers must know that the law enforcement, it's an honorable, noble profession. And I will say this, nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop.
Pete,
Sure.
I think Raphael, you guys at Manhattan have written about qualified immunity, right? I think I've read some of it. I don't know if you have anything.
We have, yeah. I mean, I think, the push to abolish qualified immunity is largely a misguided one insofar as I think it's based on misinformation. And the argument basically goes like this, that police officers who know that they have some form of qualified immunity will then sort of take that sense of immunity with them into the field and then commit acts of malevolence that they wouldn't have otherwise committed had they not had that protection. And that's just entirely wrong because the empirics just aren't with that argument. If you look at the effect of qualified immunity on litigation nationally, it's not particularly large. Less than 4% of cases filed against police, according to recent studies, are disposed of on qualified immunity grounds, which tells you that there's a pretty good chance that where that defense is successfully invoked, that the police officers are invoking the protection against ex post facto liability, which I think is the best way to kind of understand what qualified immunity is. Take New York City, for example. The Legal Aid Society maintains a database of cases filed against the NYPD. That database includes cases from between January 2015 and June of 2018. It has about 2,400 cases total. Only 74 were resolved in favor of the police officer defendants. Even if all 74 were resolved on qualified immunity grounds, which they weren't, that's still only about 3.5% of those cases. The other reality is that police get their financial protection not from qualified immunity, but from indemnification practices, which are widespread across the country. Even if a police officer is successfully sued, about 90% 99% of all dollars paid out in this country on lawsuits are paid out by the municipality, which either by statute or collective bargaining agreement agrees to indemnify those officers. And that's not a practice that we want to abandon, because for the exact reasons that have been noted, which is the recruitment and the retention crisis, which I think will only get worse. And that's something that I can speak to personally. I mean, I took the LSAT and the NYPD exam a couple weeks apart from each other when I was a senior in college. And my father, who was a retired NYPD detective, basically threatened to never talk to me again had I become a cop, because of the sense that he had back in 2010 of how bad the job was getting. So this is a real concern.
We have time for one more question. Oh, go ahead. Was there, Sheriff, whoever wanted to speak, go ahead.
Yeah, may I ask who asked the question? What outlet they're from? The reporter that asked the question?
Washington Times, Brandon.
Thank you.
Okay, this is.
If you'd like to follow,
Go ahead, Brandon.
If you'd like to follow up with me, I'll discuss this with you offline. But just so that you know, if President Biden does in fact enact an executive order taking away qualified immunity, and he does that with federal law enforcement, we will immediately file suit. We will have standing, and therefore we will immediately file suit, because we, again, just like Sheriff Stanford said, we believe that it is unconstitutional.
I have time for one more.
Great.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Caitlin with Fox News. So this is obviously an extremely partisan issue, and I was wondering, are there any steps that you can take? You know, the Democratic Party has made clear they're not interested in any Trump-era policies, remain in Mexico, building the wall. Are there any bipartisan, concrete issues you can start taking that will start addressing this issue at a smaller level?
Well, I
Debbie,
think we've thank you for the question. We've tried. I mean, you heard Mike Johnson offering amendments in committee that were reasonable amendments, saying, well, we don't want to grant amnesty to sex offenders or people that have multiple DUIs, but the Democrats unfortunately rejected even those common sense amendments. So unfortunately, I mean, we all would like to work together to actually secure the border so that our communities are safer, but I think it's very obvious to all of us that the Biden administration and the Democrats want open borders. All of their actions say that. All of their legislation says that.
If I can follow up real quick on that, you know, I think the question you're asking right now is so important. Serving on Homeland Security, there should be absolutely nothing that is partisan on this committee. This should be, as it was developed after 9/11, all about the security of this country. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one, I mentioned in my opening remarks that under Chairman Thompson's leadership, there has not been a single hearing on border security yet in this Congress. And we don't anticipate there being a single hearing. And we've asked multiple times. Number two, on the 31st of August, 2021, in a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, I introduced an amendment that not a single Democrat voted for. And that amendment simply said something to the effect of, we want to know the affiliation and the country of origin of every person who was released from the prison in Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, and whether or not they have any sort of terror ties. This should be a very simple amendment that we could all get behind, because when 9/11 happened, it was only a handful of people that it took to orchestrate that. And we saw that one of the perpetrators, the lead perpetrator of the incident that killed 13 Americans was led by somebody who was in this prison. And that's the kind of event that all of us should be able to get behind. It's a very simple amendment, a very simple piece of legislation that all Americans, I think, can get behind, especially knowing what just happened in Colleyville. So if they won't come to the table on those simple things, then what will they come to the table on?
Chip?
Yeah, I would just say, look, I've as a now 3 years in Congress, I've been able to move a number of things on a bipartisan basis as members of Freedom Caucus. Doesn't matter, man. Well, there's PPP. I've got a bill with Abigail Spanberger right now. Happy to work across the aisle. But on this, Democrats are entrenched. They refuse to secure the border. It's crass political partisanship at the risk of the American people and the population. They're endangering American people's lives. That's the truth. I'll be happy to work on a bipartisan basis to file articles of impeachment against Mayorkas, who deserves to be kicked out of office for failing to faithfully execute the laws of the United States.
We have time for about one more question. Sir.
Two quick questions.
Where are you from? What?
I'm from my name's Joe Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon.
Okay.
So quick question regarding just lack of transparency from the Biden administration on immigration. The public has yet to receive the December border crossing numbers. Just by like quick Googling, it seems like they're about 4 or 5 days tardy compared to last month. We've written extensively on other reports that the Biden administration has yet to release. Any comment on that, and what should voters expect from a GOP-controlled House in 2023 when it comes to transparency?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, the American people want accountability and transparency. And if there's bad news, we as an American population can handle the bad news, but we want to know what's going to be done about it. And that's the real heart of the matter right now, is that there is not a transparent behavior when it comes to Department of Homeland Security from the Biden administration. It looks like they're covering something up, and that's what we need accountability for. I'll hand it to Chip.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brandon can jump in here, but we don't have the December numbers. It's already January, what is it, 18th or something? It's absolutely absurd. They know the numbers. They're just not releasing them. We know those numbers are probably going to be somewhere in the 170,000 range. It's going to put them over 500,000 for the last quarter, i.e. the first quarter of this fiscal year. It's an absolutely embarrassing and staggering number, and they know it, and they don't want the American people to see it. When we're in control of the House of Representatives, should the people give us back power, we should have oversight hearings on day one, hauling in Mayorkas, if he's not already out by then, and hauling in anybody else that we need to make sure they answer the questions about what they've been doing to endanger the American people. But Brandon might have
more importantly, the number that the American public has to know is how many people have been released. How many people has the Border Patrol walked out our front door? How many people have ICE let go after we put them through Title VIII proceedings and transfer them to ICE? How many juveniles has HHS released into the United States? That's the most important number. The most important number is how many people have been released into the United States. Because we don't have that number, all we can do is estimate based upon the numbers that we know. I can personally tell you that there have been in fiscal year 21 under the Biden administration, nearly 600,000 people were released into the United States. This is not a number that they will give anybody. This is not a number that they'll be transparent with. And then on top of that, there was at least 400,000 known gotaways in fiscal year 21. So we added to our population in 1 year. We added to our population more than 1 million illegal immigrants.
The question of the administration: why will you not release those numbers that Mr. Judd just mentioned, and also what is the number of known or suspected terrorists who entered this country in 2021?
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap this up. I want to thank my colleagues for the discussion and the great points you brought forward and your expertise. Raphael, thank you very much for coming. And to our elected officials and our law enforcement folks that spent some time with us, again, I want you to know we truly are thankful and respect your service. We thank you and your families for a job well done. Keep it up. Stay safe. And I want to thank Leader McCarthy for putting together this forum to talk about an important topic of public safety and border security. So we're going to end now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you.